Welcome to Nightmares at 3 a.m. Here, you'll hear real stories, taken from Reddit, from people we know, or sent directly by those who actually lived through them. Tell us, where are you watching from? What time is it for you? We read every comment and love getting to know who's on the other side of the screen. If you enjoy this kind of story, subscribe and turn on notifications. There's a lot of dark stuff coming your way. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, because what started as something simple, like a Craigslist post, ended very, very badly. There's a strange kind of melancholy in dismantling a child's past. Every screw I loosened on the little playhouse in my backyard seemed to echo the laughter of my daughter Sarah years ago. She was now a teenager who barely looked at the yard, and the pink and purple plastic playhouse, faded by the California sun, was just a reminder of how time flies. I decided to put it in the free section of Craigslist. I just wanted it to go to a good family. My name is Ben, and I'm a high school history teacher. Maybe because of my profession, I tend to see stories in everything, and I wanted a happy ending to the story of that little house. The email I received seemed to be just that. It came from a man who identified himself as Thomas. He wrote that his granddaughter, Lily, was turning 5 and that he was building a play area for her in the backyard. "Your little house looks like it has been much loved," he wrote. "I would like to give it a second life of happiness." The phrase hooked me. It was exactly what I wanted. We agreed that he would come by on Saturday to pick her up. He arrived promptly in an old, well-kept pickup truck. Thomas was a man in his 60s with white hair, a kind smile, and the calloused hands of someone who, I guessed, worked with wood. He wore a baseball cap from a team I didn't recognize. Was it a bird, maybe? The details are lost now. "Ben, I'm Thomas. What a lovely place you have," he said, squeezing my hand with surprising strength. As we dismantled the rest of the structure, he peppered me with questions. Not about the little house, but about Sarah. "What's your daughter's name? How old is she now? She must have loved this place." I complimented my daughter as any father would. I told him her name was Sarah and that she was 15. He smiled. 15. Time flies. My Lily is just starting. What school does Sarah go to? The question took me by surprise. It was too specific. I hesitated for a moment, but his face held such benign, grandfatherly curiosity that I felt paranoid for doubting. I mentioned the name of the school, and he nodded, as if taking mental notes. "Good to know," he said. "Always good to know about good schools in the area." We loaded the plastic parts into the back of the pickup truck. He thanked me profusely, shook my hand again, and drove away, leaving an awkward silence in the yard. I felt good about having helped, but a small seed of discomfort had been planted. The seed germinated that very night. While cleaning out the garage, I found a leather wallet lying near where his truck was parked. It was Thomas's wallet. My first impulse was that of a good citizen, to call him. I opened the wallet to look for a card with his number on it, and that's when the real world fell apart. In the clear pocket where a driver's license should have been, there was a picture of a little girl. Blonde hair, a baby-toothed smile. But it wasn't a family photo taken at a picnic. It was a school photo with that standard blue spotted background. And in the bottom corner, the name of the school, Westwood Elementary. It wasn't my district school, but I knew it. It was 3 towns away. My blood ran cold. Why would a grandfather keep his granddaughter's school photo in his wallet instead of his ID? And why would he lie about living nearby? I turned the photo over. On the back, written in small, precise handwriting, was the name Jessica and a date from 2 years ago. It wasn't Lily. At that moment, I knew. The story of the grandfather, the granddaughter, the birthday present, it was all a sham, an elaborate facade to get something. But what? Information. My daughter's name, her age, where she goes to school. I follow the thinking of the philosopher Hannah Arendt, who wrote about the banality of evil. She argued that evil is often not radical or demonic, but the result of the actions of ordinary people who refuse to think. Thomas didn't look like a monster. He looked like a grandfather, and this ordinariness was the perfect camouflage. He was a collector of details, a hunter who used not weapons but gentle questions. Before I could decide what to do, my cell phone rang. An unknown number. I answered. "Ben, it's Thomas. I guess I was silly and left my wallet there." The same warm voice, but now it sounded grotesque to my ears. "Yes, it's here," I managed to say, my mouth dry. "Great. I knew I could trust you," he said. There was a pause. "You know, I was telling my niece about Sarah. She was so interested to know that there are other nice girls in the neighborhood." He didn't say granddaughter, he said niece. And he used my daughter's name. It wasn't a slip of the tongue, it was a message. I know, I remember, I have the information. The terror I felt was unlike anything else. It wasn't the fear of a ghost or an urban legend. It was the real, palpable fear of a human predator who had been in my backyard, who had shaken my hand, and who now had my daughter's name stored in his sick mind. I arranged to meet him at a busy cafe the next day to return the wallet. When I arrived, he was already there, drinking coffee. His kind smile had disappeared. His eyes were cold and empty. I handed him the wallet without a word. He took it, opened it, and I saw that the photo compartment was empty. He knew I had looked. "Thank you for keeping this for me," he said, standing up. "It's important to keep things safe, especially valuable things." And he was gone, disappearing into the crowd. I went to the police. They listened. They were sympathetic. But there was nothing they could do. No crime was committed. A man took a free toy house. A man asked questions. There are no laws against being creepy. Ever since that day, I've been in a constant state of alert. I moved Sarah to another school the following semester, making up an excuse about a better academic program. I installed cameras. I became the kind of parent who distrusts everyone. What scares me most is that the little house, the excuse, is gone. But the information he gathered remains with him, an invisible trophy. The thought that keeps me awake at night is this: how many of us, in our rush to get rid of the old, have opened the door to something terribly new? 3. And what responsibility do we bear when our trash becomes a monster's treasure? There is a kind of forced optimism when you post an ad for a roommate. You describe your home, a personal sanctuary, with inviting, impersonal adjectives, turning it into a product. You smile at strangers, ask questions about their jobs and cleaning habits, and try to divine the architecture of their souls in a 20-minute interview. My name is Amelia, and I'm a night shift nurse at a Denver hospital. Rent was overwhelming me. So I jumped into the process. The ad I posted was simple, seeking someone clean, quiet, and responsible. Daniel's response felt like a godsend. His email was well written, he had a steady job at a tech company, and impeccable references. In the interview, he was even better. He was charming, in an understated way, well-dressed and articulate. He mentioned that he worked in, was it marketing or IT? I remember it sounding professional and vague, the kind of job that doesn't raise eyebrows. He complimented the cleanliness of the apartment and promised to be the most invisible roommate I'd ever had. I was sold. He moved in the following weekend. The first few weeks were perfect. He was exactly as promised, quiet and clean. We barely saw each other because of my schedule, but I began to notice little anomalies, cognitive dissonances that my nurse's brain, trained to see patterns, couldn't ignore. One day, I came home exhausted and found a book I'd been reading in the living room on the coffee table. I was pretty sure I'd left it in my bedroom. I must have been more tired than I thought, I muttered to myself, rationalizing my mistake. Next was my favorite coffee mug, one my mom had given me. I always left it on the drying rack, but I found it tucked away in the closet, in the exact spot where Daniel kept his. Little things that could easily be explained away as mistakes by a new roommate getting used to the space. But they happened with a frequency that started to bother me. The turning point came on a Wednesday morning. I came home from a particularly brutal 12-hour shift. I always locked my bedroom door. It was a habit, a ritual. That morning, the door was unlocked. I walked in and everything seemed normal. But the window, which I always left a crack open, was completely closed. The air in the room was still stagnant. The psychological warfare intensified. It was a subtle manipulation. Once, on the phone with my sister, I mentioned a childhood memory of nearly drowning in a lake during summer vacation. It was a story I had never told anyone in Denver. The next day, Daniel said in the kitchen, "I had the most horrible nightmare last night. I dreamed I was in a lake, drowning. The water was so dark, so strange." He said it casually as he made his coffee, but he looked at me for a moment, and his eyes were empty of all emotion. He was telling me that there was no room in the house, not even in my private conversations, that he could not access. That was enough. I needed to know. I bought a small security camera the size of a sugar cube and hid it on the bookshelf in my room between two thick medical books. The following Friday, I packed a bag, told Daniel I was visiting my parents for the weekend, and left. I checked into a cheap hotel on the other side of town and, with my heart in my mouth, opened a camera app on my phone. For hours, nothing happened. I was already feeling like a paranoid fool. Then, around 11 p.m., the door to my room opened on the video. Daniel walked in. He wasn't rummaging through my things or looking for valuables. What he did was much worse. He walked slowly across my room. He picked up the book from my bedside table and leafed through it, reading the passages I had underlined. He went to my closet and ran his fingers through my clothes. He picked up a framed photo of me and my sister and stared at it for a long time. Then he went to my bed, pulled down my pillow, and, laying his face on it, took a deep breath. He lay there on my bed in the dark for almost 10 minutes, perfectly still. The terror I felt was not of physical violence. It was the terror of contamination, of stolen intimacy. He didn't want my things. He wanted my essence. He was dressing himself in my life, absorbing it silently while I slept or worked. He was a parasite. I never went back to the apartment again except once, with two big friends and a police officer who agreed to escort me to get my most important things. Daniel wasn't there. I left behind my furniture, my pots and pans, my security deposit, the price of my escape. He texted me a week later, "I hope you're okay." I was worried. I deleted the number. I moved into a small studio apartment that I can barely afford. The camera is still in a box, along with the footage I've never shown anyone. Sometimes the silence of my new apartment feels as heavy as his presence. We open our doors, our lives, to strangers out of necessity, hoping for the best. But what's the line between a roommate and a squatter? And how well do you really know the person sleeping across the hall? I've always thought of selling things online as a necessary evil, a kind of rite of passage for people who are moving or otherwise trying to organize their lives. You take pictures of a once usual object. Try to find the best angle, the best light, like you're putting together a dating profile for a chair or a bookshelf. And then you toss it into the digital abyss of Craigslist, hoping that a random stranger will take it. My name is Alex. I'm 34, and I'm a graphic designer. I moved to Portland, Oregon 6 months ago after a breakup that left more wreckage than I'd like to admit. The new apartment was smaller, cleaner, more anonymous. It was perfect. The only problem was the armoire, a massive, heavy, ornate piece of dark oak that had belonged to my grandfather. In my old house, it had occupied pride of place. Here, it felt like a sleeping, out-of-place giant, eating up what little space I had. Selling was the only option. I placed the ad on a Tuesday night with a price I thought was fair and the note, "Buyer will pick it up. Heavy item, bring help." The photos showed the carvings and the dark, almost black wood. Within an hour, I received an email. "Hello, my name is Frank. I'm very interested in your closet. It looks like a piece of history. Can I come by tomorrow to see it? I'll be free around 7 p.m. The message was direct, polite. I replied yes, sent my address, and at 7 o'clock the next evening, the doorbell rang. Frank was a middle-aged man, perhaps in his early 50s, with an easy smile and eyes that seemed to register everything. He wore a wool coat, even though the night was not too cold, and his handshake was firm. "Alex, nice to meet you. I'm Frank." "Wow, what an interesting building," he said, already looking around the hallway at the ceiling, at the type of flooring. "Old building, isn't it? It has character." I led him inside. The cabinet dominated the room. He walked over to it and ran his hand over the wood, an almost reverent gesture. "It's even more beautiful in person," he said, his eyes never leaving the object. "My father was a carpenter. He would have loved this." The mention of his father made me lower my guard. I remembered my grandfather showing me how to polish that same wood, the smell of beeswax filling my childhood home. Frank opened the doors, looked inside, tested the drawers. He asked the right questions about the type of wood, the age of the furniture. But between questions, he would insert observations about my apartment. "Your view's beautiful. I like that lamp. You have good taste in books." They were compliments, but they sounded like notes. He reminded me of that actor in a 70s thriller. Oh, what's his name? A guy with a piercing gaze. Anyway, I couldn't remember. "I'll take it," he finally announced. The price is great, but like you said, it's heavy. I'll need to go back with my brother-in-law in a bigger truck. Can we schedule it for Saturday?" We agreed. He thanked me, shook my hand again, and left. I closed the door and felt a strange relief. He wasn't scary, just intense, a little too curious. But then, who isn't? It wasn't until the next morning that the first piece moved on the chessboard of my mind. I have a little habit, a neurosis maybe. All my books on the shelf are lined up on their front edges, creating a perfectly straight line. As I was drinking my coffee, I noticed a book, Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, that was sticking out about an inch. I hadn't touched that book in years. Could it have been Frank? Impossible. He barely got close to the shelf. I tried to rationalize. Maybe a vibration from the traffic on the street. Maybe I had moved it myself without realizing it. I put the book back and tried to forget. On Friday night, I got a text from an unknown number. "Still on for tomorrow at 10? Brought a strong friend? Frank." I nodded, but something about it bothered me. The casualness, the certainty, as if we were old acquaintances. Paranoia began to creep in, a weed growing in the cracks of my logic. I began to question everything. Had he touched anything else? I looked around the apartment, trying to see my space through his eyes. Every object seemed exposed, vulnerable. I followed the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard's line, "Anxiety is the vertigo of freedom." At that moment, I felt dizzy. The freedom of a stranger in my personal space had turned into a suffocating anxiety about his intentions. What did he really want? The closet seemed like just a pretext, a dark wooden Trojan horse that I had invited inside. On Saturday at 9:50 a.m., my intercom rang. I took a deep breath and let myself in. But when I opened the door to my apartment, it wasn't the Frank I expected. It was a younger, thin man with a baseball cap pulled low on his head and an older, heavier man. Neither of them was Frank. "We came for the closet," the younger man said without even introducing himself. "Frank paid us to do the shipping." I felt a chill. Frank wasn't coming. He didn't need to. He had already gotten what he wanted, access. He had seen the inside of my house, measured my spaces, analyzed my belongings. The two men worked in silence, wrapping the cabinet in blankets and strapping it to a moving dolly. They were professional, efficient, and completely indifferent to my presence. Within 20 minutes, the space where the cabinet had once stood was empty except for a layer of dust on the floor. They were gone. I stood in the middle of the room, feeling violated. The money was in my account, transferred by Frank an hour earlier, as promised. The transaction had been successful, but I felt cheated, as if I had lost something far more valuable than a piece of furniture. The silence in the apartment was heavy, accusatory. Then I saw it. On the dusty floor where the cabinet used to be, there was something. It wasn't a scratch in the wood or an old mark. It was a small circle of metal, a coin. It wasn't an ordinary coin. It was one of those flattened pennies you get in a tourist ticket machine. I picked it up. The image engraved on it was of St. John's Bridge, right here in Portland. And beneath the image, a single word engraved in tiny letters. Found. Found. He hadn't left that by accident. It was a message, a signature. He wasn't buying a closet. He was cataloging a place. Me? My blood ran cold. Frank wasn't a buyer. He was a collector of spaces, of lives, and now he had mine. I never heard from Frank again. Sometimes, when I walk through the city, I get a chill on the back of my neck, a feeling that I'm being watched. I scan the faces in the crowd, searching for that easy smile, those curious eyes. The fear is not of what he might do, but of what he has already done. He has turned my sanctuary into a stage and left me with a constant, terrifying doubt. Maybe the mistake was placing the ad, or maybe the mistake is believing that there is a door we can keep closed to the outside world. The question that haunts me on my darkest nights is this: how many times have we invited strangers into our lives, not our homes, through a screen? And what is the price of trusting that the person on the other side is who they say they are? I don't have the answer. All I have is the empty space in my living room and a penny that I keep in my drawer as a reminder of the day I was found. For a translator like me, silence isn't just the absence of sound, it's the blank canvas on which words take shape. My name is Maya, and my work demands a level of immersion that the modern world rarely allows. So I was looking for a specific pair of headphones, a vintage Sennheiser model, famous not for its powerful bass, but for its ability to create a near-perfect sonic vacuum. These were my father's headphones. I remember him in his armchair, eyes closed, listening to his jazz records. He always said that the quality of a pair of headphones is measured by the silence it can create before the first note plays. I found a pair on Craigslist, listed in a nearby town about a 40-minute drive from Seattle. The price was good, almost too good. The seller, a man named Elias, was succinct in his emails. These were my father's. They're in perfect condition. You have to hear them to understand. His insistence on trying them on in person struck me as a sign of pride, of someone who knew the value of what he was selling. That Saturday, I drove to a suburban neighborhood that seemed frozen in time. Wide streets, perfectly trimmed trees, and an oppressive silence. Elias's house was one of those 1980s models with angular architecture and large windows that revealed nothing of the interior. The style, what was it called? Split level, maybe? It didn't matter. What mattered was the quiet. It seemed like even the birds avoided the place. Elias opened the door. He was a thin, pale man with dark circles under his eyes that contrasted with his polite, almost rehearsed smile. The house inside was impeccably clean, minimalist to the point of being sterile. There were no pictures on the walls, no books on the shelves, just the essential furniture and an impressive sound system in one corner of the living room. "Maya, come in," he said, his voice low. "The headphones are here." He led me over to the equipment. The headphones sat on a wooden stand, looking like a relic. He plugged them into a turntable and picked up a vinyl record in a white sleeve with no inscriptions. "I need you to test them with this disc," he said. "It's the best way to appreciate the clarity." I sat down in a leather chair. I put on my headphones, and the world disappeared. The isolation was total, just as I had expected. Elias put the needle on the record. I braced myself for a piece of classical music or a jazz solo, but what came was nothing. Just the soft hiss of the needle on the vinyl, and beneath it, a deep, textured silence. "It's a room tone recording," Elias explained, his voice now a distant echo outside the headphones. "My father was obsessed with capturing the acoustics of empty spaces." I listened. It was strange, but fascinating. A recorded silence. But after about a minute, I heard something else. A tiny, almost imperceptible sound beneath the hiss. A faint rustling of fabric, like a shirt sleeve brushing against a wall. I tried to adjust my headphones, thinking it was interference, but the sound was there, recorded on the vinyl. Then a quick, sharp intake of breath. I took off my headphones. "I heard something," I said, "on the recording." Elias's smile faltered for a split second. "Oh, it's probably just static from the vinyl. It's an old recording." He seemed eager to get the subject over with, but I knew what I'd heard. It was an organic human sound, a sound that shouldn't be there. Despite the strangeness, I wanted those headphones. And to be honest, I wanted out of that house. I paid Elias, who barely looked me in the eye as he took the money. He handed me the headphones and the white vinyl record. "They belong together," was all he said. I went back to my apartment in Seattle, to my sanctuary. The uncomfortable feeling of that house still clung to me. I waited until nightfall, when the city had calmed down. I plugged my headphones into my own sound system, put on the white vinyl, and closed my eyes. The silence returned, thick and complete. And then the sounds. First, the rustling of fabric, then breathing. But there was more. A soft creak, like a wooden step creaking under weight. And then the thing that made my heart stop, a whisper. A single word muffled and faint, but unmistakable. Now, I ripped off my headphones. My apartment, once a haven, suddenly felt unsafe. That vinyl wasn't a recording of an empty space. It was a recording of a space busy. Silence was not the protagonist. It was the canvas upon which sounds of a furtive presence were painted. What my father called the blank canvas had become proof of an invisible event. Over the next week, paranoia consumed me. I tried calling Elias, but his number was disconnected. His Craigslist ad had been deleted, his existence dissolved into the digital ether. Who was his father? What was he recording? And the most terrifying question, who was in the room with him? I follow the line of filmmaker David Lynch. The world is wild at heart and weird at top. Beneath the quiet suburban surface of that house, there was something inexplicable. This recording wasn't about sound, it was about the absence of permission. It was a violation documented in audio. The headphones are now in a box in the back of my closet, along with the white vinyl. I can't use them, and I can't get rid of them. They are an artifact of a moment that doesn't belong to me, but of which I have become a witness. They taught me that terror doesn't need screams. Sometimes it lives in the quietest sound, in the detail that is out of place, in the silence that is not really empty. And the question that haunts me is this: does every object carry the echo of its owners? What if some of these echoes are screams that were never heard? How many silent stories are stored in basements and attics, just waiting for the right buyer to press play? Attics have a smell all their own, a mixture of dust, old wood, and time encapsulated. It's the smell of memory. My name is Clara, and 3 months ago, I inherited my grandmother's house outside Boise, Idaho. I also inherited everything that was inside it, including an attic crammed with 70 years of accumulated life. Cleaning it out felt like an archaeological and emotionally draining task. I managed to pack most of the stuff away, but one item was impossible to move on my own: an antique mirror in a heavy dark mahogany frame that was leaning against one of the walls. I decided the quickest solution would be to hire someone from the services section of Craigslist. I found an ad that looked promising. "I'll take your junk away. Fast work, fair price. Call Leo." No frills, straight to the point. It sounded professional. Leo arrived in a white pickup truck with no markings. The make? I think it was a Ford or maybe a Chevrolet. The image is a blur in my memory. He was a man of few words, thin, with a focused gaze that missed nothing. He didn't smile, just nodded. His professionalism was almost a form of silence. I led him up to the attic. "It's mostly that mirror," I said, pointing, "and some boxes that are too heavy." He examined the mirror, then the rest of the attic, with methodical attention. His eyes moved slowly, not like someone assessing a job, but like someone memorizing a map. He made no comments, no complaints about the weight or the dust. He just worked. In less than an hour, the mirror and the heaviest boxes were gone. He told me the price. I paid in cash, and he left. I felt an immense relief. The job was done. The house seemed lighter. The relief lasted exactly one day. The next morning, while I was cleaning my grandmother's room, I noticed that the top drawer of her dresser was slightly open. I went to close it and stopped. There was a small blue velvet jewelry box that I had rummaged through the day before. I knew exactly what was inside. A few worthless brooches and a small silver locket with my grandmother's initials engraved on it. I opened the box. The brooches were there. The locket was not. My heart began to beat faster. The locket had no monetary value whatsoever. It was small, tarnished by time. A common thief wouldn't even look at it. But to me, it had immense sentimental value. I remembered Leo's gaze, taking in everything. He hadn't been in the room, but I had left the door open. Had he had time while I was in the kitchen getting him water? Doubt was poison. There was no proof, only an absence. A small piece of my family history, stolen. The true nature of the terror was revealed not in a lost object, but in an email I received 3 days later. It came from an email address that was just a random string of letters and numbers. There was no subject line, there was only an attachment. With shaking hands, I opened it. It was a photo. The photo was of my attic. The view was from the corner where the mirror used to be. It showed the remaining boxes, the dusty window, the wooden beam on the ceiling. But it was a recent photo. One of the boxes I had moved to the center of the room myself. After that, Leo was gone, was clearly visible in his new position. It took me a few seconds to realize the implication. He hadn't just taken the mirror, he'd used it. In that brief moment when I'd stepped down into the kitchen, he must have positioned his phone or a camera, using the mirror's reflection to capture a perfect image of the space without me noticing. Or the alternative was even worse. He'd come back. The email was a statement. He was telling me, "I've been there, I see things, I have a piece of your past, the medallion, and a picture of your gift, the photo." He didn't want money, he wanted power, the power to make me feel watched and powerless in my own home. At that moment, I remembered a quote from the writer Patricia Highsmith, a master of exploring dark psychology. "My imagination works much better when I don't have to stick to the facts." I had no facts, just a missing locket and an anonymous photo. But my imagination filled in the rest with absolute terror. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the corner of my eye was him. My grandmother's house, my refuge, had become his observation box. I went to the police. The detective who saw me was patient, but his helplessness was clear. "Miss," he said, sighing, "there's nothing we can do. It's an anonymous photograph of an attic. We can't prove who took it or why, and the locket, without proof, It's your word against his. Leo, of course, disappeared. The Craigslist ad was removed. The phone number was disconnected. He was a ghost who had touched me and then vanished, leaving behind only the coldness of his passing. I ended up selling the house. I couldn't sleep there anymore, but the feeling never left me. That cold, human fear that someone, somewhere, has a small piece of your life and is silently watching it. We live in a time when we invite strangers into our homes to fix a pipe, deliver food, or in my case, take away the past. We trust them. But what happens when one of them decides they want more than just payment? What happens when they decide to take a piece of you? For an architecture student, a sketchbook is more than a diary. It is a seismograph of the soul, recording every tremor of inspiration, every observation of the way light kisses the corner of a building. My name is Jacob, and I lost mine on the Chicago subway one rainy Tuesday. The loss felt like an amputation. That notebook contained months of work, sketches of facades, floor plans of imaginary apartments, lecture notes, and, most intimately, casual drawings of the people around me, the places I frequented, my own street. I frantically scoured the local lost and found website and Craigslist. Nothing. After a week, I accepted the emptiness and tried to move on. It was my friend Chloe who found the post. She sent me the link with no comment, just a question mark. It was in the missed connections section. The title was, "To the Artist on the Brown Line Train." My heart skipped a beat. The post read, "Tuesday, around 6 p.m., you were sketching the Chicago Board of Trade building. You were wearing a dark green coat and headphones. Your concentration was so intense that you didn't even notice when your briefcase opened and your notebook fell out. I picked it up. It's safe with me. I'd like to return it." I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, so strong that I ignored the strangeness of the situation. Why post it in missed connections and not lost and found? It seemed like a romantic gesture, if a bit misguided. I set up an anonymous email and replied, thanking her and suggesting we meet at a public cafe to pick up the notebook. The answer came the next day. It was short. "I know your favorite coffee, but not yet. I want to make sure the notebook goes to the right owner. Tell me about the last drawing you made in it." The request was specific, almost a test, and the phrase, "I know your favorite coffee," was a red flag, but I ignored it. My favorite coffee was drawn on the notebook. Of course the person knew. I responded by describing a quick sketch I had made of my younger sister, laughing. His response was simply, "I know." The days that followed were silent. The person never responded again. I began to think it was a cruel joke. I tried to forget about it. That's when Chloe sent me another link, another post in Missed Connections by the same anonymous author. The headline read, "To the Artist of the Daily Grind. I saw you today. You looked worried. You ordered a black coffee and sat by the window. You have a habit of rubbing the back of your neck when you're frustrated. You've been there for 47 minutes. The notebook is still safe." The air went out of my lungs. The daily grind was my coffee. I had been there that morning. The person didn't just have my notebook, he was following me. The notebook wasn't the reason for our connection, it was the instruction manual for my life. It contained my schedule, the names of my teachers, the addresses of the buildings I like to draw, and my home address. Paranoia is a fever. It colors the world with a sickening hue. Every person on the subway, every face in the cafe window has become a suspect. I remembered my theory classes and the thought of the philosopher Michel Foucault, that the most effective surveillance is that which the prisoner internalizes, becoming his own guard. I was my own guard, and prison was my daily life. I tried to mentally retrace my steps on the day I lost the notebook, the woman in the red coat, the man reading a book with a cover. What was the title? Something with shadow. The faces were blurs, all of them now wearing the mask of my observer. The next contact wasn't on Craigslist. It was an email sent directly to my college address, which was written on the first page of my notebook. The subject line was homework. The body of the email contained a single attached image. It was a scan of one of my pages, an architectural study I had done of the facade of my own apartment building in Lincoln Park. But there was one change. A small X, drawn in digital red ink, marked the window of my third-floor bedroom. Below the image, a single line of text. A vulnerable structure. Lots of glass exposure. This was no longer a game. It was an invasion. He wasn't just watching me from afar. He was applying his own warped sense of analysis to my safest space. He was telling me, I know where you sleep, and I'm judging your defenses. I went to the campus police. I showed them the posts, the email. The officer was sympathetic, but serious. It was a case of cyber stalking, but the perpetrator was a ghost. There were no explicit threats of violence, just methodical, psychological torture. They filed a complaint and advised me to vary my routines, to be vigilant. Useless advice. How can you be vigilant against a faceless enemy who knows more about you than your friends? I stopped going to my favorite places. I gave up the subway. Every day was an exercise in evasion. A week later, a brown paper package showed up at my door. My name and address were written in neat block letters. Inside was my notebook. I flipped through it with sweaty hands. Everything seemed to be there, every drawing, every note. Nothing seemed to have been altered, except for a red silk bookmark that wasn't mine. It marked a specific page, the last drawing I had mentioned, the portrait of my sister. I turned the page. On the back, in neat, almost architectural handwriting, were two words: game over. He had given me back my world, but not before showing me how fragile it was. He no longer needed the notebook. He already had everything he wanted. His sense of victory hung over me, suffocating. We leave traces of ourselves everywhere, in likes, comments, and, in my case, graffiti lines. We believe they are harmless, but what happens when someone decides to follow those traces to your door? And who is the true owner of your story? You, or the one who secretly observes it? There's a particular despair in the sound of an engine dying on a country road hundreds of miles from home. It's a sound of finality, a metallic hiccup that throws you out of the modern world and leaves you to chance. My name is Sam. I was 22 years old and needed to get to a small town in northern Washington state to see my grandmother, perhaps for the last time, and my car, a '98 Honda that had seen better days, decided that this would be its last trip. With no cell phone signal and a college student's budget, options were slim. I hitched a ride to the nearest town, a dusty place with a single stoplight, and settled into a diner with Wi-Fi. It was there that, in an act of sheer desperation, I posted an ad on Craigslist's car share section. Need a ride to Northwood or surrounding area? Urgent, gas split. Less than an hour later, I got a text. I'm heading to Bellingham. I can drop you off near Northwood. I'll be out in an hour. Gary? The message was a miracle. Gary arrived in a large pickup truck, a dark color that looked blue or maybe black, depending on how the light hit it. He was a stocky man in his 50s, with an easy smile and a hunting cap. He looked like the stereotypical nice guy. Sam, I'm Gary. Hop in, kid. We're taking you to see your grandma, he said, tossing my backpack into the trunk. I was a little surprised that he mentioned my grandma. I'd written the sign down as family emergency. I rationalized that he was just being friendly, filling in the blanks. The first 100 miles were normal. We talked about sports, the weather, the terrible food at the diner. He was a good listener. But slowly, the dynamic began to change. He started asking questions, not about me, but about the ad I had posted. You said you were in a tough situation, he said, not taking his eyes off the road. It's tough when you depend on others, isn't it? It sure is, I replied, feeling a slight shiver. After a while, he took an exit off the main highway, turning onto a single-lane country road lined with dense forests. A shortcut, he announced with a wink. Trust me, I know these roads like the back of my hand. My cell phone signal disappeared. The feeling of isolation was total. The sun began to set, painting the sky orange and purple, but the forest seemed to swallow the light. It was in this silence that he spoke again. It's funny, he began in a campfire story tone. The people I take here, they're all in a hurry. I took a girl once, young, about your age. She was running away from her boyfriend. She told me everything, every detail. People tell you everything when they're trapped in a metal box going at high speed. He looked at me. His easy smile was gone. I helped her. I helped her find a new place to stay, somewhere really quiet. The implication in those words was heavy, ominous. The path seemed to go on forever. Each turn revealed more of the same dark road. The outside world had disappeared. It was just the two of us and the roar of the engine. Then the engine began to sputter. The pickup slowed to a stop on the dirt shoulder. The silence that followed was deafening. Oh, shit, Gary said, hitting the steering wheel with restrained force. Must be the fuel pump. I'll check it out. He got out and popped the hood. I sat in the car, my heart hammering in my chest. It was dark now. I was stuck in the middle of nowhere with a man who told stories about missing girls. It was a horror movie cliche, and I was the idiot who had bought the ticket. After a few minutes, he returned to the passenger window, wiping his hands on a rag. He didn't look worried. He was smiling again, but it was a different smile, a predator's smile. You know, Sam, he said, leaning against the door, I don't think we're going anywhere tonight. He reached into the glove compartment and opened it. But since we have time, I want to show you something. Inside the glove compartment, scattered like chewing gum, was a collection of identification cards, driver's licenses from Washington State, Oregon, student IDs from various universities. I saw the faces of a young man, a smiling woman, another with a frightened look. They were his trophies. My whole body froze. I couldn't breathe. This was the end. He was a collector, and I was the newest addition to his collection. But then something unexpected happened. He started laughing, a loud, genuine laugh. "Your face," he gasped, wiping away a tear. "You should have seen your face." He closed the glove compartment, got back into the driver's seat, turned the key, and the engine started right away, purring loudly and healthily as if it had never failed. The breakdown was a farce, a theater performed for a single spectator. We drove the rest of the way, perhaps an hour, in complete silence. The only sound was the sound of the road. I remembered something I had read by the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. A man can do what he wants, but he cannot will what he wants. I wanted to jump out of that car, but my body was paralyzed. I had no will of my own. I was just luggage. He dropped me off in front of Northwood Hospital, just as he'd promised. The blue neon sign looked surreal. As I grabbed my backpack, he turned to me. "Give your grandma a hug for me," he said. His voice was normal again, friendly. "And Sam, it was nice meeting you." He drove away, the dark truck disappearing into the night. I walked into the hospital, but fear followed me, an invisible passenger that would never go away. I was physically unharmed, but he had broken me psychologically. How many times have we placed our safety in the hands of a stranger out of convenience or desperation? We trust an anonymous profile, a few polite phrases, but when the car door closes and civilization disappears in the rear-view mirror, what is the true price of the ride? Being a freelancer is living in a state of calculated uncertainty. You get used to taking odd jobs at odd hours for amounts of money that rarely seem fair. My name is Julia, and I'm a photographer. My job is, in theory, to find the truth in a frame to capture an honest moment. But honesty, I've discovered, is a rare commodity. The ad in Craigslist's jobs section was vague and intriguing. Photographer needed for private family event. Discretion is key. Excellent pay. I sent in my portfolio, full of weddings and portraits of smiling children. I got a call the next day. The voice on the phone was an older man, formal and precise. He introduced himself as Mr. Abernathy. He explained the situation. The family was holding a celebration of life for their younger brother Arthur, who they said was terminally ill with a rare disease. The twist? Arthur wanted to be there. He wanted to witness his own funeral, so to speak. It was macabre, but the world is full of strange ways to deal with grief. The fee he offered was 3 times my usual rate. I accepted. The address led me to a winding dirt road in rural Vermont, nearly 2 hours from where I lived. The house was one of those imposing Victorian structures with a turret and windows that looked like empty eyes. The exact architecture escapes me. Was it Queen Anne style? I can't say, but the sense of decay that I'll never forget. Mr. Abernathy met me at the door. Inside, the house was dark and silent, filled with heavy furniture draped in white sheets like sitting ghosts. In the main living room, a small group of 5 people, all dressed in sober shades of black and gray, had gathered, and in a high-backed chair facing the unlit fireplace sat Arthur. He was a thin, pale man with sunken eyes that still had a spark of life in them. He didn't look like he was on the verge of death, just tired, deeply tired. "Your instructions are simple," Mr. Abernathy whispered. "Photograph the event as it unfolds. Capture the moments, the interactions. But don't talk to Arthur. In fact, pretend he can't hear you. Just document." I set to work. feeling like an intruder on an alien planet. The event was not a celebration, it was a wake. Family members chatted in hushed tones, sharing memories of Arthur, always in the past tense. "I remember Arthur loved to sail," said a woman who appeared to be his sister. "He had an infectious laugh," added another man. And Arthur was there, not 10 feet away, listening to his own obituary. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just stared at the non-existent fire in the grate. No one looked at him. No one offered him a glass of water. He was a ghost at his own farewell party. My job, which had once been to record joy, was now to document an act of psychological cruelty so profound it made me sick. The camera in my hands felt like it weighed a ton. During a break, when the family had gone into the kitchen to make tea, Mr. Abernathy came over to me. He had a small smile on his lips. "You're doing an excellent job," he said. "You have a good eye for absence." He looked at his brother Arthur, who remained motionless in the chair. "It's important to capture the moment when someone becomes a memory, the transition. Your camera," he continued, turning to me, "makes it official. It's the final witness that the person who was here is no longer here." At that moment, I understood. This wasn't about mourning or celebration. It was a ritual of erasure. They weren't saying goodbye to Arthur. They were expelling him from existence, making him a ghost in his own skin. And I, with my camera, was the tool they had hired to complete the spell. I remembered something the writer Susan Sontag said: "To photograph is to participate in another person's mortality, vulnerability, and mutability." I wasn't just participating, I was being complicit. The sickening climax of the event was when they gathered around Arthur's armchair. One by one, they placed a hand on his shoulder and shared a final memory, a final word of farewell, always speaking as if he were already dead. "Goodbye, brother. I will miss our conversations." And with each word, I saw something break in Arthur's eyes. A single tear ran down his pale face, and I, by contract, by cowardice, by money, took the picture. I captured the exact moment when a man's soul was methodically murdered by his own family. At the end, Mr. Abernathy handed me a thick envelope with the money. There was a significant bonus. "For your discretion and understanding," he said. As I packed my gear into the car, I glanced up at the living room window. Arthur was standing there staring at me. His expression wasn't one of anger, but of utter emptiness, a silent plea that reached through the glass and lodged itself in my chest. I drove home with the taste of ash in my mouth. When I got to my studio, I erased the memory card. I deleted every photo, every piece of evidence of my complicity. But it was no use. The images were already burned into the back of my eyes. I had their money, stained with invisible blood. How much of ourselves are we willing to sell for a job? Where is the line between professional observation and participation in an act of evil? Is the witness, with his camera and his silence, less guilty than the perpetrators of the crime? I don't have the answers. I only have the photos that I will never see again, but that will haunt me forever. They say the internet never forgets, but that's not true. The internet is a graveyard with underpaid gardeners, and I was one of them. My name is Liam, and my job, if you could call it that, was to erase digital ghosts. I was the guy families hired to delete the social media accounts, message board profiles, and embarrassing stories of their departed loved ones, wiping the digital slate clean so that their memories could rest in peace. The job came, ironically, from an ad on Craigslist. The client, Eleanor, needed someone to delete the extensive online presence of her brother Mark, who had recently passed away. The job was big and the pay was generous. She handed me an external hard drive that she said contained a backup of Mark's entire digital life, along with a list of passwords. He was prolific, she'd said during our only face-to-face meeting. Eleanor was an elegant woman with a tired look in her eyes. She reminded me of a literature professor I'd had in college, Mrs. Albright or Alcott. The name was gone, but the sense of cold authority was the same. Just delete everything, please, especially his Craigslist activity. He spent a lot of time there. What I found on the hard drive was more than prolific, it was epic. A decade of life told through Craigslist ads. There was everything: an antique oak armoire for sale in Portland, a search for a roommate in Denver, an ad for a ride in a dark pickup truck in Washington State, a search for a photographer for a family event in Vermont. Each post was a little vignette of a life. My job was simple: log in, delete, log out, repeat. But curiosity is an occupational disease for those who work with other people's secrets. I started reading the older ads, and that's when the chills started to run down my spine. One post from 8 years ago, selling a cabinet, described the piece and meeting the buyer, a nervous graphic designer. Another, from 5 years ago, detailed the experience of meeting a roommate, a night shift nurse who was so easy to scare. There were posts in the missed connections section describing an architecture student who lost his notebook. There was an ad for a junk removal service mentioning having retrieved a beautiful antique mirror and a small silver souvenir from the home of a woman who had inherited the property from her grandmother. My blood turned to ice. These were not the activities of just any man. They were echoes, fragments of all the horror stories we had heard whispered about this site. And Mark seemed to be at the center of them all, not as the victim, but as the hidden narrator, the predator. I called Eleanor, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I'm in the middle of work, and I noticed your brother had some peculiar interactions. His announcements are very detailed." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When she spoke, her voice no longer held the tone of mourning. It was hard as steel. "Mark had many projects. Your job, Mr. Walsh, is not to analyze, it's to delete. That's what you're paid to do. Do you understand?" Understood. I was the grave digger, and I was asking too many questions about the body. Fear drove me to dig deeper. On my hard drive was a hidden, password-protected folder. It took me 2 days, using every trick I knew, to open it. What I found inside was not a file, it was an abyss. The folder was called Collection. Inside were subfolders labeled with initials: a P, Amelia the nurse; J.W., Jacob the student; C.M., Clara from the mirror. Inside each folder were trophies: an audio recording of a quiet room with a barely audible whisper, a photograph of a silver medallion in a gloved hand, scans of pages from a sketchbook with red notes in the margins, a short video shot from a low angle of a middle-aged man laughing as he looked at a collection of driver's licenses, and in the root folder, a single text document called Philosophy. It was a manifesto. Mark described himself not as a criminal, but as an artist of the ephemeral, a collector of moments of vulnerability. He believed that a person's true essence was revealed only in the instant their security was shattered. Craigslist was his hunting ground, an endless tapestry of human needs that he could exploit. He didn't want money or possessions. He wanted history. He fed on fear. I remembered an idea by the Argentine writer Jorge Luis Borges about a library that contained all possible stories. Mark wasn't building a library. He was collecting the people who starred in his favorite horror stories. He was the author, the director, and the only member of the audience. And Eleanor? She wasn't the grieving sister. She was the healer, the protector of the monster's legacy. I finished the job. I deleted every post, every account, every comment. I erased Mark's digital existence from the face of the earth as I was paid to do. The hard drive I physically destroyed, breaking it into pieces and throwing them into different trash cans around town. But first, I made a copy of the collection folder. It's on an encrypted drive that I keep in a safe. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe as proof of an evil that no one would believe. Or maybe because, by erasing the ghost, I became its guardian. Craigslist is just a tool, a digital bulletin board. But it reflects a truth about us, that we are all just one post away from need, despair, and darkness. How many Marks are out there using anonymity as a cloak, hunting in the forgotten corners of the internet? And I, who now hold their secrets, what have I become? The latest ghost in their collection?